speak about stories today. I've been writing stories for quite a few years now, and it's a passion I have, and I want to be able to spend this half an hour. I'm happy to be able to talk to you about stories and how they can help in the classroom and what they do. Reading for pleasure, reading for life. These two things are very connected. And but we'll start with reading for pleasure, and then we'll move on to reading for life. But I really want to begin. But first, I must remember to tell you that if you have any questions, please write them down. At the end, I'll try to answer some of them. If I don't have time to answer all of them, we will respond with the email. Okay. So, yeah, please write lots of questions. That would be great. If I'm going to talk about stories, I think I should begin by telling one very brief story, and this story hopefully will help me to help me to sort of illustrate some of the things I'm going to talk about afterwards. It's a true story. It's a short story. And it begins 12 years ago when my daughter was very young, and it's winter, and she had a bad cold. And I was sitting with her in the living room, and I noticed that the cold wasn't getting any better. She was starting to cough, and then after a few minutes, she started to have difficulty breathing. Was the sound that I heard. My heart was thumping. I was panicking, obviously, as a parent, when you see your child in difficulty. But I couldn't show it. And very soon I was in the back of a car with my daughter going to the hospital. And I decided at that point that I was going to tell her a story, because that's what I did. That's what I did to relax my daughter before bed, and I couldn't think of anything else to do. So I started with a story. And as soon as I began with a story, I saw that her eyes locked onto mine, story mode. So encouraged by this, I carried on. Luckily, the hospital is not far from my home. But as I was telling the story, she was in pain, she was frightened, she was uncomfortable. But as the story went on, I noticed that there was something else competing for attention, and that was the story. And I can't manage to move the slide. It was the story. But of course, the hospital was very near, and I didn't have time to finish my story. And of course, I as soon as we got to the hospital, I picked her up and I said, Alicia, now I'm going to take you to the nice lady, and she's going to make you better. My daughter responded in this way. Daddy, Daddy. I said, what, Alicia, what? What happens next? She shouted. I often go back to that moment and that question that she asked that evening. In a way, it helped me to remember how powerful stories are, that they can even make a child forget, or at least to not just think of pain and discomfort and fear, but to think of something else, which was the story in this case, to jump in. She was inside a story, and it had the same amount of importance as the distress that she felt physically, it seemed. The magic of the story, the power of the story. It takes you to a place. A story, if it's told well, if it's a good story, the head and the heart are engaged. You're engaged both intellectually and emotionally. And when you are in that place where your head and heart are both engaged, learning becomes almost effortless. That's why, when we do things that we love, we become good at them. We love doing something. The head and the heart is involved. So we can take to that place. And of course, reading should be fun. I mean, reading, it should be pleasurable. And the kind of reading that I'm talking about is fun. I mean, here we have an example of it's actually a non-fiction. It's talking about London, loving London. And You know, I think we've all been to cities with our children, or with children in general, and like they've got a different idea of what they want to see and what they want to do. To us, maybe we want to go to see certain monuments or museums, but they want something different. And often you feel someone tugging at your shirt, saying, "I want to go here, I want to go there." And these books actually address that and talk about things that a kid would be interested in doing. Look at Dino Snores, for example, Dino Snores, I should say. Would you like to spend a night sleeping near a big dinosaur? I'm sure most children would like that. And so this kind of input engages the child, engages the reader. But the question really is, can we get our students to that place I just spoke about, when they're dealing with a foreign language? And I think we can. And the answer lies in the question that my daughter asked that evening, that winter evening: what happens next? Running through all the stories, there is this question continually, because we need to get our kids, our students, our children to ask questions. Sometimes we focus so much on getting students to answer questions and answering questions ourselves, but the way to knowledge often is by asking the right questions. What happens next is one of the most important questions of all. It's a question that drives us. Here's an example from a story that I retold, a classic story some years ago, called The Railway Children. All British people know this story and love this story. But if you don't know this story, it's about a family, 3 children and a mother. The children can't find their father, and they're living together, and they're wondering where their father is. And in this scene, the mother is ill, and one of the daughters, Bobby, speaks to the doctor, and the doctor says, "Your mother needs some medicine. The house must be warm, and she needs some good hot food and a lot of tea." And then, as you see towards the bottom of the page, Bobby is thinking, all things that are very expensive. We don't have the money. What can we do? Think, Bobby, think. That evening, the children took a sheet from their bed. What did they do with the sheet? Well, soon you'll know. What happens next? Getting the child to participate in this decision, in this question, to understand, to try and work out what will happen next. Let's go back just a few lines to what Bobby thinks. She uses a pronoun we twice here. First she says, "We don't have the money." Here the we is exclusive. She's saying, we children don't have the money. You may have the money, but we don't. Second we though, what can we do? That's inclusive. That's including the reader. That's engaging the reader, getting them to participate in the decision and try to work out what the children can do to help their mother. This kind of question, what happens next, runs through the whole thing, the whole story, and gets the reader to read on. The stories and the books I'm talking about today are 4 types: non-fiction, original fiction, The Boy with the Red Balloon, and then classical fiction, like the Canterbury Tales. My Bolivia, which is an example of a real life story, a story about a child who lives in Bolivia, and also non-fiction. All of them have one thing in common, really. They want to take the child, the student, the reader on a journey. Whenever I write a story, the first thing I have to do is to fall in love with the story, whether it's my own story or whether it's a classic story that I'm adapting. I have to fall in love with it so that I really want to tell it, because I want to take the reader on the journey with me. I know the level of the reader, I know the age, and I want to make sure they can come with me. So I'm looking along the journey for potential difficulties and trying to negotiate these difficulties to make the journey as comfortable as possible, to make it as comfortable as possible. Sometimes I will need to extend a helping hand to help them on their way, But I don't want the reader to see that helping hand. I really want the reader to feel that they've made it on their own. Then they'll come back for more. Then they will be talking about having a lifelong habit. If the reading is a pleasure, if it's fun, if it involves the person who's reading, then they'll come back for more. All the best speakers that I know of English are all follow stories. They always have. So what we want is to get our students to have the same, to share this passion, have the same passion. So it's like a journey for me. It's the same process when we talk about classic stories that are retold or adapted. You have to fall in love with the story so that you really want to tell it. I equate it sometimes with taking someone for the first time to a beautiful place, like Rome. I love Rome, and whenever friends and family come from England to visit, I take them there. But I just have 1 day, maximum 2 days to show them Rome. And of course, that's impossible to show them everything. I can't show them everything. So I have to show them something that gives them the idea of Rome, the spirit of Rome, so that they want to come back again and see more. And so here we have the Colosseum, for example, you can see in front of you. I'm not going to take them there like at midday when the sun is directly overhead and it's beating, and it will be uncomfortable, the journey. They won't enjoy it, even if the place is beautiful. They won't enjoy it. It won't be a pleasure. And they might not come back again. So I'll take them there another time. I'll take them to see something like the Pantheon. If I really want them to get a quality experience, I'll take them there at 6 o'clock in the evening when the light is just perfect. And the light that shines through the aperture is quite magical. I want them to have a quality experience with the stories, with the story, a comfortable journey and a quality experience. The stories are all trying to install and to teach values, with themes like friendship and honesty, kindness, respect for others, family, loyalty, sensitivity, humility. The list can go on and on and on. And these stories repeat these things. These values are so important. And the stories are populated by memorable characters. We have to have characters that are believable, that so that the reader can buy into the story. They want to, so that the reader can root for their character. They want the character to do well. They go and they're prepared to go through the ups and downs of the character during the story. Here we have Anne of Green Gables, for example, a very memorable character that children respond to, always have. And here we have Ricardo from a real life story. The real life story is what is, in my opinion, is done really well with these stories, is that it gently introduces the reader into Ricardo's world. It doesn't just plunge into a story. It talks about things that kids can relate to, like friends, family, school, things that they have something to say about and think about. And then, and only then, after talking about Ricardo's school, for example, his family, his friends, there is the story. And context is so important. And these real life stories give the story a context. So another thing that I don't know, looking at this picture, I just really want to press that red button. When I see something like this, do not press, I want to press it. I don't know if you have the same kind of reaction, but I don't press it because there's a rule, do not press. I know that if I press that button, there will be consequences. So I will choose not to press it. Children, when they play video games, they can press that red button and see what happens. If it goes badly, they can start the game again. That's not good for our children. That doesn't teach them anything. Life doesn't present this possibility of starting all over again, or at least very rarely does it present this possibility. They have to learn about consequences. Stories are all about consequences. Things that the characters do, everything they do has a consequence. And so reading gives the children this input, this understanding and this awareness of consequences. We mustn't underestimate the intelligence of the reader as well. One of the things that really always should be taken into consideration with a story is what the reader will already know. We want the reader to be fully engaged, participating, not just passive. It shouldn't be a passive process. To give you an idea of what I mean, here's a classic story that I adapted, that I retold a couple of years ago, Black Beauty. If you don't know it, it's the story of a horse, the autobiography of a horse. And one of the first things I noticed, I thought, how can I get this story to an A1 level, to a really basic level, children can understand and have a pleasurable experience reading it. What I noticed about the original story is that Black Beauty is incredibly intelligent, incredibly perceptive. In fact, has the perceptions of a human being. He knows what a school is. He knows what a church is for, what a train is for. He sees the world through the eyes of a human being. I thought, well, to make this story, to change this story, to make it readable and enjoyable at a low level of English, I have to make Black Beauty think like a horse, because then I can adapt the language, and I know that the reader will be able to follow me and fill in the gaps. I'll show you what I mean. Here, one side we have the original story, and the other side, the adapted, the retold story. And this is a scene, quite a harrowing scene, a difficult scene when Black Beauty sees a horse being shot because his leg is broken. And it's really the first introduction of the horse to the world of men and the injustice that there is. And in the original, here we have Mr. Bond. When Mr. Bond, the farrier, came to look at the black horse that lay groaning on the grass, he felt him all over and shook his head. One of his legs was broken. Then someone ran to our master's house and came back with a gun. Presently there was a loud bang and a dreadful shriek, and then all was still. The black horse moved no more. In the A1 version, the same scene. Some men came to look at the horse. I could hear them speaking. "It's no good," said one of the men. "It's his leg. It won't get better." Then the man took something out of a bag. He put it near the horse's head, and then there was a loud noise. Bang! After this noise, the horse never moved again. With the knowledge that a child would have of the world that he or she lives in, they will know what that something was that the man took out of a bag. They will know what that sound bang means. They will understand everything. They will be able to fill in the gaps. And it's something that always should be taken into account when writing a story and adapting it. Another thing that I think stories are really good at is obviously talking about right and wrong. Here's a story that it's a very personal story for me. It's a story that means a lot to me because it's a story about my life as a child being bullied. And there's a scene in this story, Egghead, which illustrates my point. There is a scene when, if you look at the picture, when Egghead, I'll use the third person here, although it's me, so it sounds strange for me to use myself, to talk about myself in the third person, but the character, he sees another boy that's also bullied and thinks, okay, it's a good idea to jump on this boy and beat him so that the other children maybe then they'll like him. And so there's the scene. Egghead is staring into the face of this other boy who's also bullied. And if we take just the middle section of the page, page 26 here, just this paragraph, I'm looking at the face, he is looking at the face of David. Egghead is looking at the face of David, and he says, "But then I turned and looked at David's face. It was the face of somebody who was always afraid, the face of somebody who was hated for no reason. It was a face like my face. Why am I doing this? I thought. This is wrong. So again, here, engaging the reader, thinking about these kinds of things. And then there's Granny Fixit, which a character which children love. Many stories with Granny Fixit, and I think with Granny Fixit, it's a perfect example of how problem solving is another skill, another life skill, which can be gently introduced through stories. And if we look at a scene from this story, Granny Fixit and the Viking children, we have the children are gathered around this, what they think is a rock with an eye, but little by little they realize it's not a rock, it's a baby whale. The mother is waiting. And look at what the little boy says in the corner of the illustration. What can we do? And again, there is this we, this inclusive we, which is engaging the reader, inviting the reader to participate, getting the reader to jump in and take part. Values also like a friendship, which I mentioned before. This is an example from the non-fiction book, Great Friends. We can't, as I said before, we can't impose values on our children. We can get them to reflect on their values. And a story or a piece of non-fiction like this does exactly that. It does it in a way children can relate to. This, for example, is one example. They have like different friendships, famous friendships that are not something like abstract, but something real to the children. They can read about these guys, and it helps them to reflect on friendship in general, with the example of Harry Potter. And also the activities, it's not just about grammar and vocabulary. Obviously they are important, but also look at exercises 7 and 8. 7 invites the reader to write a letter to one of the characters. Again, engaging the reader, again, getting them to jump into the story. These are exercises from the adaptation of Sense and Sensibility. And then exercise 8, inviting the reader again to think about what happens next. Write down what you think happens in chapter 4. And of course, we have the focus pages as well towards the end of the book, looking at some of the themes that are developed in the story, taking them and giving them an historical context. Here we have the golden age of piracy, and this is taken from Treasure Island, so it's perfect to, again, get the students interested, get the reader interested in the themes that are touched upon in the book. And I must never forget the illustrations. They're beautiful. Every book has its own personality because of the illustrations are always different, and they're very in tune with the mood and the themes of the story. You have seen some examples just in this half an hour. And words and pictures go together. Every picture tells a story. And when you write, you try to conjure up pictures in the mind. Here we have the word bicicletta, which transforms into a bicycle. Obviously, if the reader is not Italian and they think, what's this word at the end? They can see what it is. It's a bicycle. The illustrations obviously serve to explain difficult vocabulary and help the reader to understand difficult moments in the story. But let's not underestimate as well, they give an aesthetic quality to the story, to the book. And they make you feel like it's something good to hold in your hand. And also they're a resting place for the reader when they're having to negotiate lots of text. And okay, after a few pages, they have a picture they can look at to rest a little bit, to rest their eyes. So the illustrations are really important, and the writer always collaborates with the artist to get just the right picture, just the right mood. When I wrote Egghead, the pictures really for me, were just the way I wanted them to be, to tell the story. Really, for me, reading has always been an important part of my life. And I used to read from 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock every evening in my bedroom. For me, it was like opening a door, reading a book. And at 9 o'clock, when I had to close the book, it felt like a door was shutting behind me. Well, in trying to encourage readers to read on, to jump into stories, then we're trying to leave the door wide open. Once they've read one book, if they feel confident that they've made it on their own, that they've had a comfortable journey, a pleasurable experience, they've learned things, they'll pick up another one. There are many to choose from, so that the door can be left wide open. My daughter went to the doctor and she had an injection of cortisone. And she felt better quite quickly. Her breathing returned to normal. And she felt sleepy because it obviously had been a really stressful experience. But she wouldn't go to sleep. She wouldn't go to sleep until I told her in the story what happened next. So I had to finish that story. The magical question, what happens next? Thank you. Now, if there are any questions that you'd like to ask me, I will be more than happy to try and answer them. If you're interested in in some of the stories I've talked about or others, I invite you to go to www.elilaspigaedizione.it e andare su rete commerciali. I invite you to do that. But if there are any questions, please ask. Or write, obviously. How about teenagers 14 to 18? Yeah, there are stories for young adults. I think that I've written 3 or 4 myself, and they're quite a variety of stories which address those needs. Obviously, again, when I write a story, or when any of the team write a story, there are 2 factors: the level, the language level that is pitched at, and also the age range, the age of the students, so that the themes, the ideas that are touched upon, a student, a reader of that age can relate to. So yes, it's very important. There is a teen series and also young adult series. But I think really the most important thing is to pick the story, pick the right story. Pick a story that's obviously interesting for the student, and get the student to be involved in that choice as well, maybe. But I always say, like when we in class, we often get our students to read difficult stuff that's challenging, as I said before. But if for this kind of reading, really, if the student has a level like B1, they should have an A2 story to read, because this is a different kind of reading, extensive reading. The road should be flat, so that they can read without any problem, without having to try and reach for a dictionary, without stopping and starting. And this has an incredible impact on fluency and confidence as well. So really, that's why to have a wide variety of choice is important, and to pick the right story, especially the first story. Well, yeah, that's a great question, Simona Antonucci. How would you convince a kid who doesn't like reading to pick up a book, to give books a chance? I think the input of the teacher is really vital at the beginning. I mean, this kind of reading, what you really want to do is to encourage the kids to read on their own, because there's not much teaching time. You don't have much teaching time to read a whole story with them. So there are many things you can do. I think, you could, for example, to go through the first chapter with the class very slowly, carefully, to get the student interested, engaged, also to make them realize that they can understand it. Often I read stories in different age levels, and that's the first hurdle, is to get them, oh, I can understand that. I can understand it. Because often the reluctance to read is because of that, is for that reason. And other things you can do is to show the pictures, to the students and get them to construct what they think how the story will unfold. Get them to make up a story in a way, and then to see how similar the story is to theirs. Chapter titles as well can be used in this way. Also preparing a quiz. Sometimes to prepare a quiz, but not a difficult quiz, because they do enough, there's enough testing already. A quiz they can do quite easily, like a Caccia al Tesoro. Sometimes it's enough just to motivate a child to read, to get the answers before anybody else, for example. Or even to engage them by asking them to give points and stars for the stories they read, to give them the power to do that. That can be quite interesting. I've spoken to students who have done that before, and even students who have written reviews of stories that I have written. And I've come across some of them and I've responded to them. Makes it real. Yeah, I hope that's answered your question, Simona. Thank you. But any other questions you have, I would be happy to answer them from email as well. Yeah, we can answer them, and any input is great. You know, I often go into schools with stories, and I recently went to 2 elementary schools with a story, and just with one book, and the children didn't have the book, but they were asking their question, what happens next after? Just about 5 or 10 minutes, their curiosity. Yes, there are plenty of choose from. I think this is the teacher, but the teacher's input is fundamental. Also, another thing, the teacher showing the student that that he or she cares. Often the feedback I get is like, if it's a book that's they read in the summer, if the teacher doesn't ask about how it's going, then they lose motivation to read it. If the teacher knows that if the student knows that the teacher is interested, I think that's another motivating factor. I would love to go to Friuli. Oh, I can't even say Friuli, sorry. It's just because I've been speaking English for 30 minutes now, and so to switch to Italian, even to say the name of a place that Friuli's, I love traveling around with stories, so yes, of course, I'll be very happy to come. I was in Bolzano 2 or 3 weeks ago with my story Egghead, and I had a wonderful time. Sometimes I go into schools, classes that have read the Egghead story, for example. They don't know I'm coming. I ask the teacher not to tell them. And then I come in and I start to talk, and little by little they realize that it's the character from the book, a little bit older. But I did this in Rome, for example, in Ancona. I did this as well, in other places as well. And they're always engaged. And my fear at the beginning was that they would think, oh, there's this old guy now. He's not Egghead anymore. But it wasn't like that. Some of the children even gave me a football. They wanted me to play football because in the story I was excluded from this game. And they're totally engaged. And also one important thing, I don't tell them that I can speak Italian. Only at the end when I say goodbye to them. And their faces, it's a picture. I think this is an excellent question about listening or reading. Teachers have different techniques, and obviously it depends a lot on the instinct of the teacher. Some teachers prefer to do a listening first. I would do something visual at the beginning first, to be honest, with the pictures, and to get them to think about the story, what it could be, what it could involve, before doing a listening exercise. But some teachers prefer prefer this, and I think that that's fine as well. Some very good English speakers among my students. Should I ask them to read aloud? You mean? Yeah. If they are confident. I mean, this is all about giving confidence. So actually, in the story, Egghead, the first scene is Egghead, the student who wants to read, and so reading aloud is something I really wanted to do. Obviously, it depends on the student, and if you have created an environment where it's possible, and I'm sure you have, Annalisa, then yeah, it would be great. But it's all about confidence, about them getting to the end on their own, making it, feeling as though they can make it on their own. Oh, I love these questions. Keep them coming. I don't know how much time I've got, but any questions, I love these questions because they make me think as well. You know, from my personal experience, when I get a group of young adults responding to that first question, sorry, I can't remember your name, the first question about 14 to 18-year-olds, often they like a challenge, so I will tell them at the very beginning, I'm going to tell you a story. It's a true story, and it's pitched. The story is at B1 level, and you are B1 level, so you should understand everything. And then I start to tell the story, and they're already there. They have this challenge. They have their curiosity is engaged because they think, oh, I should be able to understand this. Okay, and they're listening attentively, and they're engaged and they're involved. Often, I'll split a story into 3 parts. A short story. First part, I'll get them to read it first, and then I'll read it out loud with them, and then stop to ask what happens next. Talk about vocabulary. The second part of the story, I will read it out. Again, I'll get them to read it again and then read it aloud. The third part, I just don't give them anything to read. I just read it. And then afterwards, I give them the written version of the third part. Because if the story is good, the third part, they're so involved. And often the feedback I get is, for a moment, just for a moment, I forgot that I was listening to the story in another language. And even if that happens just for a moment, that's really, inside I just go, yes, that's exactly what I want to happen. It's a bit like when you go to the cinema and you watch a really good film. We've all had this experience. Maybe even this weekend you had this experience. You forget about yourself. You forget about your problems. And only when on the screen you see the words "the end" and the lights come on, do you realize, oh, you have to slip back inside your skin because you're so engaged and involved in the story. And get students to forget that they're listening to a story in another language. That's really the maximum, let's say. Sometimes it happens. It's a wonderful moment. I'll say goodbye then if there are no more questions. Thanks for your questions. They were great. I really loved speaking to you. I wish I could have seen you. Oh, there's another question. Have I got time? Oh, yeah. Yes, that's a great idea about the picture. In Rome, I did a project with Egghead, the story that I talked about earlier, with a teacher, and she got the students to draw all the time, to draw what they felt, how they felt about each chapter, to write down keywords that really stuck in their minds. Even made a video of the whole process of acting out the scenes in the story. There's a lot of things that can be done. Quite very interesting if anyone's ever interested in doing this. So these are great questions. Is it possible to access a recording of the webinar? Absolutely, Simona. Absolutely. This has been recorded. An email will arrive for people who didn't manage to catch all of the webinar. So yeah, you can watch the bits that you missed, and that would be great, Simona. Thank you for your time. Thank you. I've really enjoyed myself. I hope to see you actually in real life, one day, not just looking at the screen. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.